The reason the light's green is because we're talking about Rolex. It's as close as I can get the color as possible. There are a ton of Rolex Watches and Wonders reaction videos already. Although I also have an opinion about these new watches, I actually think this year's Rolex lineup signals something bigger and more important than the individual watch releases. So that's what I'm going to spend my time talking about. I've got two parts to this video, which first is a relatively quick rundown of the most interesting changes to the lineup, and then secondly my thoughts on why I think all this represents some really big shifts internally in Rolex. An Explorer in 40mm. We got ourselves a 40mm Rolex Explorer, something that many of us in the watch community predicted. After the discontinuation of the 39mm not long ago and the release of the 36mm, there was a space for a larger Explorer. Although the trend in the market has been towards smaller watches, 36mm is still way too small for many people. The sweet spot seems to be around 38 to 40mm, and Rolex has obliged with a 40mm Explorer. No polar dial, of course, that was never going to happen. An updated Daytona. The Daytona has been updated. Much in the spirit of classic Rolex, they have made minor incremental changes to the Daytona overall. The case has not increased in size as many predicted, but the proportions and overall design has been tweaked, with the biggest changes being wider lugs for a more substantial profile. A new bezel, which is no longer ceramic but rather steel with ceramic inlay. An updated movement. A number of high-end dial combinations discontinued, so overall a slimming down of the line, and then the major change, a display case back, which is only available on the Platinum model. But it's a big thing for Rolex. The new titanium Yachtmaster. I was an idiot, partly at least. In my Rolex predictions video, I said that I expect the Sea Dweller to become the titanium watch. I was wrong about that, but I was right that titanium would be reserved for a specific line, which would not be the Submariner. Having conveniently completely forgotten that Ben Ainslie wore a prototype titanium Yachtmaster a couple of years back, it should have been obvious that the Yachtmaster was going to become the next titanium Rolex, but I should have known. The 1908 line, or as we all call it, not the Cellini line. I actually thought that the Cellini line was dead. Last year, or was it the year before? Pretty much all Cellini models were discontinued, all except for the Moonphase model. To be perfectly honest, my suspicion was that Rolex had a bucket load of Moonphase movements lying around and wanted to get rid of them, so they just decided to keep the Cellini Moonphase in the catalogue until the point that they sold the last Moonphase movement. The surprise here is that they have reintroduced a new dress watch on a leather strap, the 1908. A full gold, time-only, small seconds dress watch, which reminds me a lot of a Calatrava. Like, a lot. The Milgauss. Finally, the Milgauss is discontinued, which was a possibility, but also a surprise. It's a shame, as I would have loved a new Z Blue, but this quirky Rolex is now out of the catalogue. Well, until they bring it back in 3 years' time. In other news, the Oyster Perpetual got some new dials, different dials for the Day-Date 36, an updated Sky Dweller, new colors, and a couple of new high-end and mid-end GMT Master 2 variations. Big changes. I teased in the beginning that there are some really big change implications this year, and I believe there are a couple. Before I get into them, I think I have to preface it with that these are my thoughts right now. It's a hypothesis. I have an idea based on the information at my disposal. I could be right, I could be wrong, I could be close, I could be far off. But by sharing it with you, you can add your thoughts and reflections to better test and develop the hypothesis. It's a long-winded way of saying, remember to comment below, and also please subscribe if you enjoy my videos. Rolex still believes that there's a market for dress watches. Let's get one thing out of the way. The 1908 is an admission on the part of Rolex that the Cellini was a failure, at least by their definition, since they effectively discontinued it a while back and now introduce a completely not Cellini dress watch. They are clearly giving dress watches another shot with this 1908 line. Rolex, as I have said, is all about making money. They are head and shoulders better than anybody else and don't do things by accident. As Adrian Barker said recently, Omega just throws stuff at the wall to see what sticks. Rolex doesn't do that. They are more deliberate and reflected. Introducing a dress watch is a clear signal that there is a market for luxury dress watches, at least in their minds. To that, I suppose you can say, well, duh, but think about it. Patek has the Calatrava and similar models, but AP only has the code 1159, which AP is positioning as much as possible as a lifestyle watch more than a dress watch. Vacheron has dress watches, but the Overseas is the watch that steals the headline. Like I said, the 1908 has more than a passing resemblance to the Patek Calatrava, and I'm not insinuating in any way that they were inspired by Patek, but I do think that Rolex is taking another stab at the high-end dress watch category, running and gunning for Patek, VC, and some of the more niche brands like Breguet and the like. Rolex is also being shaped by the market. If you hang around in the watch community long enough, you will hear someone say, where Rolex goes, everyone else follows. Or Rolex only does what Rolex wants to do. Others move deliberately on trends like green dials, titanium or whatever. But when it comes to overarching moves, Rolex often sets a large part of the tone. But not this year. Display casebacks, titanium, quirky dials, color variations on the Sky Dweller. These are all things that people have been screaming for years, and now Rolex has given it to us while the market has been doing this for a while. A display caseback is a huge thing for Rolex. Like, when have you heard of Rolex with display casebacks? This is something that collectors ask for, but it's also a differentiator that a lot of normal watch buyers find as a convincing purchase option. Being able to say you have a watch with a movement that is so good that it deserves to be put on display is a big thing, and Rolex has obliged. Titanium has been a trend material for a while, again driven by the market, and Rolex has obliged by committing to the material as well. The Moonswatch was a collab designed for a lot of reasons that we won't go into detail with here. That's for another story. Most importantly, I saw the Moonswatch as an attempt at opening the eyes of first-time watch buyers to the larger world of watches. The Moonswatch is in part marketed as a quintessential starter or gateway watch. The OP dials in weird funky colors is in my mind doing the same thing, trying to grab a younger, more vibrant segment of the market in their most affordable model. Rolex is reacting and adapting to the market at a level that has been unheard of in many years, adjusting their assortment and their lineup to account for changing buyer behavior and demands. Oh, and also, let's just be clear, things like display casebacks, Jubilee bracelets, titanium, and the like allow you to up the price and improve profitability. Broadening and reshifting the entire lineup. At one point or another, we've all said this. All Rolex watches look the same. The Sea Dweller is the bigger Submariner, the GMT is the sub with the GMT function, and the Yachtmaster is the Submariner that nobody wants. Well, almost nobody. Rolex operates with this lineup of classic and professional, and without repeating something that I said in the video linked above, all of the Rolex models inhabit a fairly narrow space of broadly appealing watches. For an expert, yes, we know that a GMT isn't just a different bezel, it's a different movement with a different function, but to the average buyer, it's just the one with an extra hand, at least initially. Also, functionally, all of these watches kind of have the same use case. They wear very similarly, and are largely interchangeable, and it comes a lot down to personal preference which one you choose, or get allocated anyway. But this has changed. The Yachtmaster is in titanium now. Before, I would have said that the Yachtmaster was a dressy yacht club kind of watch. Now, at 42mm in full titanium, this isn't for the yacht club, it's for the performance yacht racer. It's moved all the way from dressy or dressy sport to true tool. And no, platinum on a Yachtmaster did not make it a tool because of the robustness of platinum. I've been on an America's Cup racer, there's no platinum on that boat. The moves on the Daytona, with the display caseback on the platinum model, the GMT model with Jubilee bracelet, and the Yachtmaster going to titanium have stretched the Rolex lineup. And by Rolex standards, they've stretched them a lot. Taking into account last year's releases of the deeper diving deep seas, you again see this stretching trend of the lineup, making for a less samey collection. Where Rolex still calls it the classic line and the professional line, in my mind there's now a more clear segmentation at work here, with the classic line having dress classic and plain classic as the two subdivisions, and professional having dress professional and tool professional as three subdivisions. So dress professional is where the GMT and Daytona sit. Professional is where you have the core base of the Sub and the Explorer. And then finally you have tool professional, which is where you have the Explorer 2, the chunky Sea Dweller, and the titanium Yachtmaster. No Jubilee or caseback, but you get titanium and extreme specs as the differentiators. That, and then the Air King that just still doesn't really fit anywhere. I said in my last video that Rolex were very middle of the road. They still are, but they're spreading out and less middle of the road. They're less samey, they're more different, and that's huge. Granted, I could be reading too much into all of this, but obviously this is how I'm seeing Rolex right now based on this year and previous year's moves as an overall direction. Personally, I don't particularly like the 1908 and still think it's going to have a tough time by Rolex standards. I'm curious to see if the movements can stand up to the scrutiny that so many other brands have been getting for a long time. And finally, despite its 42mm, the Yachtmaster with its rough and rugged aesthetic went from being my least favorite Rolex to being my favorite, I think. What do you think? What's your favorite overall? Let me know in the comments. Give me your thoughts, your reflections. Thanks for over 1,000 subs this last half year. Comment, like, subscribe. Cheers.